Welcome to Rethinking K-12 Education Grant on Demand. This episode is Zooming with Students, Tips and Tricks. What and why? What is this? Zoom is a cloud-based video conferencing service you can use to virtually meet with others, either by video or audio only, or both, while conducting live chats. Why does it matter? Teachers need a way to meet with students in the virtual world in an engaging and creative way. Learning objectives. By the end of this episode, you'll learn to share your screen, have virtual classroom management, engage your students via Zoom, encourage collaboration, and make Zoom sessions more fun for students.
The easier that you can make it for students to join your Zoom meetings, the more likely they are going to join. One way to do that is to use the same room for the majority of our meetings. So you might organize it by your class, your period, the grade that you teach, but create one reoccurring meeting. When you go to schedule a meeting, if you check the reoccurring meeting setting, this will give you the option to save this meeting over a long period of time. Essentially, the room will exist until you delete it. This is helpful because students always know where they are going to meet you, and they're not searching through email or whatever learning platform you're using to find the link. Another tip is to make sure that you embed the password in the link. While this does give some risks with security if the link were able to get out there, you can manage that by having a waiting room for students so that you don't admit everybody that has the link. Another thing that you might want to provide is the meeting ID number and the password. The reason for this is because some students might be joining on a phone or another device, and it might ask them for that information instead of being able to access it through the link. Again, the goal for this is to make it as easy as possible for students to join so that they're more likely to participate. Some reminders. Depending on how you want your classroom to be set up, you should definitely manage your settings beforehand. Think of it just like when you choose what posters are going to be on the wall for that year, where handouts are going to be found. All of that needs to be organized in the virtual world just like it would in a classroom. Some suggestions. You might want to set up a way to automatically save the chat. This can be accessed in your settings. The reason for this is because you might have questions that you don't get to. So if students ask a question and you want to be able to get back to them, if that chat saves automatically, you won't have to remember to do it. Additionally, you could use the chat to take attendance. So if you have students type their name into the chat when they join and type their name at the end of the session, it'll let you know who is in the class the whole time. Something else you might want to save are the whiteboards. If you're ever doing a share where you're showing some type of work or math, or you're having a discussion, or you're doing a graphic organizer, if you use the whiteboard function and you have it save automatically, you'll have those steps to refer back to later. It's also really helpful for students that might have missed a session, and then also for you to go back and just get the feedback that you needed. Another feature that will help increase engagement in your classroom is enabling the breakout rooms. And I'm going to go over a little bit about Zoom chat etiquette. And the breakout rooms are a way to address a lot of people trying to speak at the same time. If you want to have those breakout discussions and that group work that you would normally have in a classroom setting, breakout rooms are the way to do it. There'll be another training on that, so please keep an eye out for it. Another thing that you might want to consider, and again, depending on the culture of your classroom, is whether or not you want to allow participants to annotate. It's very helpful for students to be able to interact with the screen that they're working on. It will help keep them engaged. On the other hand, consider what would happen if you let every student go up to the board with a marker or chalk. Another thing that can be fun if you set the correct norms for it is allowing virtual backgrounds. But otherwise, I would disable them until you've set those norms in your classroom. As I said earlier, set up a recurring meeting room for the students. You can do this in your account or in the desktop client, which is accessing Zoom on your computer as opposed to accessing it in the internet browser. Another feature, if you're lucky and you have a pro or some type of licensed account, is enabling polling. This is really good for student engagement because it gives the students something that they can answer and join in on. It also helps you collect some feedback on where students are with different questions that you might ask them and check for understanding. Don't worry, if you don't have polling because you don't have a licensed account, there are tricks to go around it. I'm going to show you some life hacks to do this. Or should I say, teacher hacks. Sometimes when we think back to our classroom, we might have thought of that time where we had to search for the handout that we needed to hand out. Something similar can happen in the virtual world if you don't have everything open beforehand. So these are just some best practices. Think about having any presentations you're planning on doing, or maybe using some online gaming. You want to have that all open beforehand so that you avoid that dead air, because as we know, students can get distracted if they're not being occupied. Another thing to consider, if you're planning on sharing things on your screen with your students via Zoom, it's a good idea to also have something on paper or a second screen if you have one. It can be difficult to manage switching screens, so if you're trying to take notes in a document on what students are doing or their feedback, it's easier to do that on paper or a second device. And don't forget to practice. Practicing with colleagues will definitely increase your confidence when you're in the front of the classroom. Many of us may be many years from that first year of teaching. We have a lot of experience under our belts. However, in many ways, entering into the virtual world is like going through your first year of teaching all over again. And remember, we used to practice. We had student teaching, we would stand in the front of the classroom and do model lessons. All of that can kind of be done in the virtual world as well. If you get a good teacher partner, you can also share that co-host and go back and forth and take turns doing the different features and working through managing participants. If you have an iOS device, you have a special advantage. This could be either your iPhone or an iPad. When you go to share in the normal functions of Zoom, you can share a second device. This would be like having two screens, two monitors that you're looking at. It's helpful for you when you're doing the share so that you don't feel like you're trying to manage multiple screens at the same time. If you want to know more about doing this, Zoom is really great at providing support online, and I've included a link here. It goes into how to connect your second device with the AirPlay. The first time you do it, it's relatively, it walks you through each step. If you have a PC, you might have to install a plugin in order to do it, but once you've practiced it once or twice, you'll get the hang of it, and the second or third setup won't be so difficult. Some other advanced sharing that you might want to think about is the portion of the screen share. This is great for presentations. I'm going to show you a little PowerPoint hack that I find super helpful. And then also if you have a second camera. For example, maybe you've been using a document camera in your classroom to show students how you work through a math problem. You can do it again the same way if you have that at home and you're able to connect it to your computer. Unfortunately, teachers are often poor, so there are other hacks. So let's say you don't have that document camera or you don't have an iOS device. Don't go out and buy one. There's a hack that works really well for document cams. So depending on how creative you want to get, you can use cans or some other way to connect your phone. And the way that you would do it is you would join with your phone into the Zoom just as if you were a second participant. And when you join, you share your camera, except you share your camera hovering over whatever you want to show. And then as you're hosting on your computer, you would feature that camera, that speaker, that person, so that they can see. One thing to note is that the sound. You do need to mute either the computer or the phone so that there's not feedback. Just another note, if you're planning to use your camera as a document camera or anything like that, you are going to want to go into your video settings and mirror or undo the mirror to your video, because otherwise everything will appear backwards. You can also enable HD from here and switch between cameras if you have more than one setup. Once you get more comfortable sharing and hosting a meeting, you can start using some of the quick keys, different commands, buttons that you can press that will hide or show your meeting controls and things like that. It is a little helpful to have it. I just wanted you to know that they are out there, and I do have them here for Windows and for Mac. There's a much larger list available online, and again, you can just look it up online, but I also have this website here for you. I'm just going to go over some technicalities about sharing your screen and ways to organize it when you're working with students. So first, I'm having a student join. I'm using my phone to do it, and it's going to give me a warning, and also if I click on participants here, they'll come up. And so I can remove the student. And again, this is a security feature to decide if you want people to come in just by clicking a link or keep them outside the door. They can't see what's going on unless you let them in. So I'm going to admit this student. So I'm going to show you one hack for sharing. When you go to share, you can choose your PowerPoint that you want to share. So if you're in PowerPoint, if I hold down the Alt and press F5, it's going to show a different version of your PowerPoint. Now, this is the full share. The student's going to see the next slide. But if I choose a different share, if I go to Advanced and I choose Portion of the Screen, I can change the size of this so that students are only seeing my presentation. If you set it up beforehand, it will automatically have the size that you need. Some reasons for this, that this might be helpful, is that let's say there's some questions that you want to ask students. You can put those questions in your notes, and then also you'll know what the next slide is going to be so you don't lose track while you're presenting. While you're sharing, take consideration with making it more interactive for the students. So for example, you can use the poll feature, which if you click on that, it's going to open up a window for you to type in a question, and you can poll the students for different questions. Have them typed up ahead of time so you're just copying and pasting. Another way that you can do it is by using some type of feature in your PowerPoint. So I'm going to show you. You can have students. They have the annotate option. I have it enabled right now. So maybe I'm having them make a mark, right? So there is one thing, right? So you might not want students to be able to just draw on your screen at any time. You can disable that right here by disabling participants' annotation. The other thing you can do is show the names of the annotators. So let me show you what that might look like. So I put that in there, and let's say I ask the students, please put a dot next to the answer that you think is correct. And now it's going to tell me all the students that put that answer. That is going to show for everybody, but it is helpful for you to have that little bit of live class interaction, and you can see which students are participating. You can also alternatively have the students put an arrow next to the answer that they think is correct. And it's going to show the arrow, and it's also telling me which student did it. Now, classroom management. People might wonder how you can have classroom management in a virtual world. It can definitely happen. Some of the questions that you need to consider is, what do you think participation looks like, just like in a regular classroom, and you need to communicate that to students. Are students going to remain muted? Are they going to use the chat? How will you take attendance? What norms do you want as a teacher? What should students do if they are confused or having technical difficulties? Classroom culture still exists in the virtual world. So just like you said at the beginning of your school year, do the same thing in the virtual world. One way to do that is to enable a lot of the marks that students can use. This is in your settings. And that's going to give you some options for students to communicate with you without unmuting themselves. So for example, maybe you want them to raise their hand if they would like to speak or have questions. Enable that feature and it's going to tell you who has their hand raised. Now the hand raised needs to be put down once the student says whatever they needed to contribute, but it will stay up until you remove it. Other things, maybe you're asking some questions and you want students to answer yes or no very quickly, or you can have them answer questions in the chat. Just make sure that they know how to access the chat. There are also the reaction features that can be enabled. Some way that you could use them, for example, is to use the clap or applause to give kudos to another student so they can really build that team culture. And then also remind students to use the thumbs up if you agree with the speaker, if somebody's participating. Setting this up beforehand is definitely going to make it a little bit more smooth for you to have classroom discussions and participation. A lot of times students are afraid to participate because they don't want to start speaking immediately or speak over somebody else. And one of the things that happens is a lot of the physical cues that we would see in person in a classroom where we know somebody wants to speak or taking turns in a conversation don't happen the same way in the virtual world. So as long as you set up some type of key so students know how to communicate with you, it will make it easier for your students to participate in the Zoom. There are also lots of ways to encourage students to engage and collaborate online. Don't forget that you already know of a lot of tools that you can use. This is one tool, Padlet, and you could use this to create a social contract. So one setup for this is to have multiple columns and students can contribute to each column. You can have them work in groups and then summarize their discussion. What's really cool about Padlet is that students can also comment on each other and respond and and then also add their own. The important part to remember is that any tool that you used before, any technological tool or learning tool or collaboration tool that you used before, you can also use in Zoom. I would recommend sharing the screen, so you would share this. And as students are working, they can see what other people are doing, or whatever other tool or document you're using. Posts of pictures and videos. Consider also using things like Google Docs or Microsoft OneDrive online that use live documents for students that they can work on at the same time. So for example, in this example, preparing for a debate, students could individually have a topic and work whoever, maybe in partners or by themselves, and then fill out the information. This is a way to encourage some online collaboration because maybe two students are working on one topic together. This might be a time that you consider turning on the private chat so that the students can chat with each other as they're going through the work. There's also the breakout rooms, which work really well for this. And like I said, I'm going to do that in a separate video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on breakout rooms. But keep in mind that you can be as creative as you are in the classroom. You can translate straight over to Zoom. Here's another tool that you might be familiar with, Kahoot. So don't forget to bring the fun that you had in your classroom straight into the virtual world. Maybe you liked playing Kahoots. You can do the same thing. So you just press play. And look, it even has a virtual option now. And your students can join the same way that they would in the classroom. And what you would do is you just project, you would share this screen in Zoom so that all the students can see how they're doing and how they're ranking, just like you would in your classroom. If you're looking to change it up, Quizzes is another tool that you can use online. It's similar to Kahoots. It has a little bit more as memes in between the questions, but it also has music and that excitement that they can play, and it's formatted very similarly. Again, if you don't have the polling option, Socrative is another tool online that you can use, and students just need this name of the room to get into the room in order to join. And there's a lot of fun options, including quizzes, space races, exit tickets, and then here's your multiple choice. These are quick questions, so if you were to open it, you would have to tell them what the question is, or you can do a true or false, and they would choose true or false. One of my personal favorites on here that students seem to really enjoy is the space race. So if you choose a space race, pick a quiz, you'd have to design the questions beforehand. And then you can let them choose different rockets, different colors, you can change it. Choose the number of teams. Anyway, so then as students are answering the questions, you would share this screen so they can see how they're doing in comparison to everybody else. So they would be answering the questions on their device while watching on your screen that you're sharing who's winning the competition.
Now that you've reached the end of the episode, you should know how to share your screen, have virtual classroom management, engage your students via Zoom, encourage collaboration, and make Zoom sessions more fun for students. For more information about additional TRLE video on-demand sessions and other available TRLE programs, go to pd.swboces.org/TRLE_grant or contact Mary Beth Wilson. We value your feedback about your experience with this digital resource. Please take a moment to share feedback about your experience with this resource using the following link.